Let's bring in our Poly panel now. We're joined by Coalition Minister and Nationals member Darren Chester and also Labor MP Josh Wilson. Good morning to you both. Thanks for joining us this morning. Darren Chester, is the government concerned about the vaccine supply issues that other countries are experiencing?
Well, good morning team and good morning Josh. And as I understand it, the situation as it sits today, our Health Minister Greg Hunt, who I think has done a terrific job in managing the health response at a federal level to COVID-19, has had conversations today with our Foreign Affairs Minister Marise Payne, who's going to do representations to the World Health Organisation to make sure we're still on track. Now, as we understand our situation here in Australia right now, we are on track. We have brought forward the approval process. It's been fully approved in terms of distribution of the vaccine. We expect to roll out towards the end of February, and obviously we'll start with the more vulnerable Australians first, and that's going to occur. It's only a matter of a few weeks from now. So these supply shocks were not unexpected given the nature of the virus, but I've had some reassurances from colleagues, and I understand Greg Hunt as Minister is making all the responsible moves you need to make to ensure that supply is available to us.
Well, as you say, it's only a few weeks away. Why haven't these conversations already happened?
Well, they have been happening. These conversations around the supply of vaccines have been happening for months. The Cabinet has, without giving away Cabinet conversations, Cabinet has been meeting and discussing the issue of the vaccine since the middle of last year. So as you'd expect, we've gone through a process where the Therapeutic Goods Association has done its approvals processes. We've been in the great situation here in Australia, with all credit to the Australian people, that we're not in a crisis situation in terms of the virus, but right around the world we've seen more than 2 million have been killed by this virus, and we're in a stronger position that we don't have to rush through the approval process. We've gone through the proper processes, and Australians can be confident when the vaccine becomes available, it is safe for them to use, and we'll be rolling that out in due course.
Josh Wilson, as Darren Chester said, that these talks have been happening for many, many months now, ever since the first news of a vaccine was even made available. But do you think, now that we are depending on these two main vaccines, there are other vaccines, of course, but we're depending on these two main ones, Pfizer and AstraZeneca, have we put all our baskets into, or all our eggs into a very narrow basket?
Well, we are where we are. The government made some choices about the arrangements it put in place. Some countries put in arrangements that gave them access to a larger range of vaccines. I think we started off with 4. There's now the 2 main ones in prospect, Pfizer and AstraZeneca. Those are the arrangements the government chose. We, of course, hope that the vaccine program rolls out smoothly. It is very important that that occurs. There have been a few slippages so far. There's now this issue with what the EU is talking about, and those are things for the government to resolve and to communicate clearly with the Australian people about. It's important that the vaccines be made available worldwide in a smooth, sensible, science-based and equitable manner.
I guess, Josh Wilson, I was trying to ask the question, should we have lobbied the EU and perhaps the US a little bit harder to ensure that Australia perhaps goes up that list? We knew that there was a supply problem that might actually happen. So should Australia have lobbied just that little bit harder to get a little bit further ahead up the list?
Well, the government said on many occasions, and the Prime Minister said, that we were at the top of the queue. So that's the expectation that the Australian public will have, because that's the commitment that the government has given. Now, the government, as I understand it, continues to say there'll be no issue with the timely availability of the vaccine, and nor should there be. So we would expect that those arrangements that the government's put in place are sufficiently robust so that there's no interruption in the supply of the vaccine on the timetable that's been explained to us. And of course, it is for the government, in the face of what the EU might be considering now, to assert our interests and to make good on the claim that they made to the Australian people, which was that the arrangements were going to be sufficient and that we were at the top of the queue.
So, Darren Chester, you said that Marise Payne was having these conversations with our counterparts overseas, with her counterparts. And so can you confirm that there is no issue with the supply that we're receiving of these vaccines, or are those conversations still being nutted out?
Well, as I understand, the conversations are still occurring, but the latest advice I've received from the Health Minister, and as late as yesterday he was answering questions from journalists on this very topic was the rollout is expected to occur towards the end of February, and we're going to start with the most vulnerable Australians first, as you'd expect. And I think Australians, rather than looking to find fault in the vaccination program, Australians can be confident that the steps they've taken, the steps state and federal governments have taken together, have kept us safe. We are in a strong position as a nation because of the work that the community has done, that governments have done. Yes, we are blessed by geography that we're an island. That's helped us out enormously. But the community has done an incredible job to keep each other safe. And we're going to have to work through this. It's not over yet. We know we have to work through this together over the coming months to roll out the vaccine. And we understand, and I'm sure every Australian understands, the importance of getting the vaccination program right, because that's our pathway back to a more normal and more open economy and getting people moving again and having people able to reunite with their families and friends. And that's very important for us. So we need to do it right, and we're working constructively with the opposition and with state governments to achieve that.
Darren Chester, just on the point on trying to get this vaccine rollout right, particularly in the initial stage, I want to highlight this report in The Australian highlighting a shortage of GPs and doctors in regional rural Australia, and you're in regional Australia. Are there concerns amongst the communities when it comes to this vaccine rollout?
Well, the broader issue around GP shortages in regional areas is a very real concern, and I read that article today, and it's no surprise to me whatsoever. We have been striving with the Australian Medical Association, with the universities, to try to see more regional students trained, to get foreign trained doctors into regional communities, and a lot of different policy initiatives have been tried, some successfully, some not so successfully, but there is no question we have a challenge right across rural and regional Australia to attract GPs and retain them. I don't quite understand it myself. You look at the lifestyle you can enjoy in these regional areas. Doctors can have great careers in regional communities, and I'd encourage anyone thinking about making the change, have a look at places like Gippsland. There's plenty of doctors shortages available for us, and we'd love to have you down here practicing. But in terms of the rollout of the vaccine, we're confident that the GPs themselves have indicated through the AMA they'll be undertaking additional hours to do those vaccinations in the early stages to ensure they can still meet their patient load, but then to do the vaccination program as well.
We might move on to our other topic of the day, and this week we had Labor's reshuffle of their front bench. And Josh Wilson, I've heard Labor people questioned this week about whether it indicates that Anthony Albanese and Labor are backing away from action on climate change, and I've heard them say no, that that's not the case. But there is a split in Labor on climate change. I've heard Labor's Joel Fitzgibbon this week has been saying that Labor has developed an obsession with climate change. He says that Labor, quote, needs to dig ourselves out of the climate change hole we've dug for ourselves. He says that Labor needs to tone down the rhetoric and overreach. What did you make of Joel Fitzgibbon's comments this week?
I didn't catch a lot of those comments. I mean, Joel's free to express his views, as all members of Parliament and broader members of the community are free to express their views. But
do you think that Labor has an obsession with climate change and that they need to tone down the rhetoric?
Absolutely not. I mean, Labor's position has been crystal clear on climate change for some considerable time. We were elected to government in 2007 with a commitment to finally get Australia moving on action on climate change and action on renewable energy and the sort of revolution in our energy system that we need. We knew then, and we know now, that there's a false choice between our environmental interests and our broad social and economic interests when it comes to climate change. They're not working in opposition, they're working in exactly the same direction. Renewable energy is the cheapest form of new energy generation. So if we want cheaper energy prices and we want more support for manufacturing and more jobs as a result, we have to take action on climate change. And we absolutely should, because we've been gifted with these extraordinary circumstances that make us one of the best placed nations in the world when it comes to renewable energy. So Labor was clear in government. We took action to see emissions reduce and to see a revolution in renewable energy. We're reaping the benefits of that now. And we've been clear at every election since then. We'll be clear at the election later this year. We are committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050, like the United States and Japan and South Korea and countries in the OECD and every state in Australia and the Business Council of Australia and all of the sensible big businesses. We are at one with all those decision makers and the scientists that know we need to be part of cooperative action on climate change for our own economic, social and environmental best interests. And that is in stark contrast to the current government. They cannot even settle a national energy policy after 8 years and 3 prime ministers and 3 treasurers. They have denialists running around and delusional makeup artists putting coal dust on their face or bull dust on their face or whatever it happens to be. That is the current government. We cannot afford to continue to drift on that front. It will be to the detriment of working women and men in Australia.
Darren Chester, we'll give you a chance here to reply. Do you think there isn't a solid energy and climate change policy coming from the coalition, and perhaps it does need to be firmed up or translated towards the ground a little bit better?
Well, I listened closely to everything Josh had to say, but he stayed away from one fundamental point, is that Labor Party now is hopelessly divided between the inner city lefties in his party who want to see renewables everywhere at the expense of coal-fired power station jobs in those regional blue-collar jobs they used to defend. So that's why Joel Fitzgibbon's had so much to say about this issue. When you look around Australia, when you talk to Australians in communities like mine, they understand the need for practical action. In fact, they've been doing it themselves already. There's been incredible investment in household solar in Australia. We've got to stop talking down Australia's achievements when it comes to taking action on these important environmental issues. We are one of the biggest investors as a nation per capita in renewable energy. We've seen a huge rollout of large-scale solar and wind farm production across our nation, but at the same time, you have to have a balanced approach so that you can have reliable baseload energy for your manufacturing sector for those occasions when the renewables, which are quite intermittent at times, don't meet the demand of the community. So when I talk to Australians, yes, they want to see practical action on these important environmental issues, but they also want reliable, affordable power. They want to keep their jobs in factories, in universities and hospitals which rely on that baseload power. So you can do a lot in terms of reducing your emissions, but at the same time maintain your strong economic position.
Darren Chester, the Nationals leader, Michael McCormack, your leader, said last year that he dismissed concerns about climate change being the concerns of raving inner city lefties.
Well, I'm not familiar with that quote, but it's not my view.
You must have been. It was from the Nationals leader last year.
He does a lot of interviews. I can't recall the quote you're referring to. What I'm suggesting and what I'm saying is when I talk to my community here in Gippsland, people are passionate about the environment. They want to see practical action. They want to do their bit. People definitely want to do their bit to reduce emissions. They understand that Australia contributes less than 2% to the total global emissions. So they understand that we can't solve this problem all by ourselves. And they want to see a balanced approach. They want to see, yes, that reliable baseload energy that right now comes from sources like coal or gas, but they do want to see further investment in renewables. And that's what we're trying to achieve with our approach to climate change as a government. We're meeting our international agreements. We've set ambitious targets for ourselves as a nation, and we're meeting them. By 2030, we'll meet that target from the Paris Agreement. In terms of the net zero emissions by 2050, under the Paris Agreement, the target is to achieve that in the second half of this century. And so we believe there's a technology approach to that rather than a taxation approach. So as a government, we're approaching this as a technology solution where we're investing $18 billion over the next 10 years on our energy roadmap. These are all practical steps that the government is taking in partnership with the community. We're not telling the community off, we're not lecturing them, we're working with the community to achieve those emissions reductions.
All right, we'll see how both parties grapple with this issue as the parliamentary year begins this coming week. Darren Chester and Josh Wilson, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
All the best, team. See you next week, Josh.
See you, Darren.